psychopathic traits in return for material reward and positions of authority. This is the problem of pathocracy. Once we realize the gravity of this situation, the obvious question presents itself. How do we throw off the yoke of the political psychopaths and topple their pathocracy? As usual, the quality of our answer to this question is directly dependent on the depth of our understanding of the underlying problem. For example, we might be tempted to ask if we can find a way to eliminate psychopaths from all positions of power. But this is a misunderstanding of the problem itself. If there are, in fact, many psychopaths who are all vying with each other for political control, then we have to understand that eliminating the current political psychopaths would merely open the door for others to step into those vacant positions. Worse, given the psychopathic nature of the power structure as it exists, the system itself actually ensures that psychopaths and sociopaths who, by definition, show no remorse or moral qualms about hurting others, will end up winning the vicious battle to fill the top spots in the political hierarchy. Only when we step back and interrogate the political system as a whole can we appreciate that the very existence of those seats of power from which a handful of individuals can rule over the masses is itself a construct of the pathocracy. Unless and until those seats of power are eliminated altogether, we will never rid ourselves of the struggle for dominance that rewards the psychopaths with control over others. The elimination of these seats of power, however, will not happen until we overturn the underlying assumption that centralization of power is necessary in the first place. So, for those of us morally sound individuals currently living under the rule of the psychopaths, the question remains, what can we possibly do to overthrow the pathocracy? As it turns out, the answer to that question may in fact be much simpler than we think. In the 1960s, psychologist Stanley Milgram set out to study the extent to which people's blind obedience to perceived authority influences their behavior. It was with this goal in mind that Milgram began his infamous study of obedience on August 7, 1961.
This machine generates electric shocks, and when you press one of the switches all the way down, the learner gets a shock.
The results of those experiments, well known to the public by now, ostensibly demonstrate that average, everyday people can be induced to deliver what they believe to be potentially lethal electric shocks to complete strangers based solely on the say-so of an authority figure.
That is incorrect. This will be at 3:30.
This finding is most commonly summarized with the factoid that a whopping 65% of participants in the original 40-person study were willing to deliver a 450-volt shock, what they were led to believe could be a potentially lethal shock, to an audibly distressed person based on nothing more than a prompt from a person in a lab coat wielding a clipboard. As one of the most famous psychological studies of the 20th century, the Milgram experiments have generated no end of debate, controversy, and scrutiny. The NPR-promoted critics of the experiments, who contend that most of the study's participants knew that the entire situation was phony, and that they disobeyed even more often than was reported, are often pitted against the establishment psychologist defenders of the experiment, who correctly note that the experiment's shocking, pun intended, conclusions have been independently reproduced time and time and time again in country after country around the world. In one particularly twisted reproduction, the researchers even sought to ensure that no subject would suspect the experiment was fake by delivering real electric shocks to cute puppies.
Missouri, Kansas City.
What almost everyone misses about the Milgram experiments, however, is that the study was not one experiment that was conducted on one set of 40 participants one time to yield one final result. In fact, Milgram conducted the experiment a total of 17 times, with 17 separate cohorts of 40 to 60 test subjects, with each iteration of the study employing a number of experimental variations. In one variation, he changed the site of the study from the Yale University campus to a rundown office building. In another variation, the test subjects were allowed to instruct an assistant to deliver the shocks instead of pressing the switch themselves. In still another variant, the lab coat-wearing actor playing the experimenter was called away on business and replaced by an ordinary man wearing a suit. And in yet another variation, the test subject was obliged to wait and watch other actors become the teacher and go through the experiment before assuming the role himself. Each variation produced markedly different results. When the test subject could instruct someone else to deliver the shocks instead of doing it himself, for instance, the percentage of participants willing to deliver the maximum, supposedly potentially lethal shock rose to an incredible 92.5%. When the experiment took place in an office building instead of on the Yale campus, the number willing to administer the maximum shock dropped to 48%. And when the test subject watched other people take the teacher role before them and observed them refusing to obey the experimenter's command to deliver the shocks, that subject's willingness to deliver the maximum shock plummeted to 10%. Let me rephrase that for the heart of thinking. When the test subject saw someone disobey the experimenter, they themselves refused to proceed with the experiment 90% of the time. This is the surprising conclusion that has been scrubbed from most accounts of the Milgram experiments. Disobedience, once modeled, becomes an option in the mind of the public. This point is crucial to understand because, exactly as Etienne de la Boétie pointed out nearly 500 years ago, a small cadre of tyrants, no matter how psychopathically menacing, are incapable of administering a tyranny all by themselves. They require the active participation of a much larger number of obedient order followers. Indeed, it's important to become conscious of the fact that none of the worst excesses of the pathocracy in recent times would have been possible without the active participation of vast swaths of the population. So-called vaccine mandates were not achieved by one psychopath in a position of political authority, or even by a gaggle of such pathocrats. They were enabled by the doctors who participated in the vaccination drives against their own experience, judgment, and training, the employers who imposed vaccine requirements on their employees, the business owners who implemented vaccine certificate checks on their premises, the police officers who threw the unvaccinated in quarantine facilities, the workers who kept those quarantine centers functioning, the judges and lawyers who rubber-stamped all these actions, etc. The same goes for any number of pathocratic abuses that we've been subjected to in recent years. These programs can only be implemented when most of the people comply with their orders and thus fulfill their role in the operation. Just as in the time of La Boétie, our enslavement to the pathocracy is, by and large, a voluntary servitude, born of obedience. Combining La Boétie's insight with Milgram's lesser-known experimental results, then, we find a template for toppling the pathocracy: highly visible acts of disobedience. But is this true? Can a single act of disobedience really bring down a pathocracy? Once again, we don't have to speculate about this possibility in a vacuum. Thanks to the wonders of modern technology, we can actually watch a recording of such an event happening in real time. On December 21st, 1989, Romanian dictator Nicolae Ceausescu took to Palace Square to address the Romanian people. At first, it proceeded like any number of such speeches he had delivered over the years. He talked about the successes of Romania's socialist revolution and sung the praises of the multilaterally developed socialist society that had arisen under his brutal reign. But then, something extraordinary happened. Someone booed. The boo was taken up by others and became a jeer. Chants of Timișoara rippled through the crowd, a reference to a massacre of political dissidents by Ceausescu's security forces that had taken place just days earlier. The dictator, unused to any sign of dissent from the population over whom he had ruled so brutally for decades, called for order. His wife demanded the crowd's silence, prompting Ceausescu to tell her to shut up, and then he attempted to continue with his speech. But the jeers began again. The footage of the incident, including Ceausescu's look of utter confusion as he realizes that the crowd has turned against him and that the threat of violence is not enough to subdue them, is priceless. There, captured on tape for posterity, is the moment when the realization dawns on the tyrant that the people have rejected his tyranny. The rest of the story, the riots and unrest, the attempted escape of Ceausescu and his wife, their capture by military defectors and their execution on Christmas Day, all stems from that precise moment when one person in the crowd simply voiced what the rest of the crowd was feeling. This is the circuit breaker effect. By saying no to illegitimate authority, resisting bullies and tyrants, disobeying immoral orders, refusing to comply with unjust mandates and demands, we make it that much easier for those around us to stand up for what they know to be right. But wait, it gets even better. First, the good news. Pathocracies are inherently unstable, and they are doomed at some point to topple under their own weight. Next, the even better news. If it's true that psychopaths can fashion a psychopathic society that twists people into sociopaths, then the opposite is true too. Healthy, non-pathological humans with love, empathy, and compassion can fashion a society that brings out the better side of human nature. This is the real goal of the erstwhile victims of the pathocrats. Not to eliminate the political psychopaths and assume their positions of power in the psychopathic political system that they created, or even to abolish that system altogether, but to envision a world in which compassion, cooperation, love, and empathy are not just encouraged, but actively rewarded. A world in which every person is allowed to become their best possible self. It's up to each one of us to model what we want to see in the world. Just like the brave dissenter who can break the circuit of tyranny by voicing opposition to the tyrant, we can also become the models of love, understanding, and compassion that will motivate others to become the same. The psychopaths have spent centuries weaponizing psychology to more effectively control us. But we can wield our understanding of human nature for something good. And that is what healthy individuals, forming a non-psychopathic society, would spend their time and resources doing.